Recent data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows a concerning rise in Nigeria's unemployment rate, hitting 5.3% in the first quarter of 2024, up from 5.0% in the previous quarter. According to the report, unemployment among women was higher at 6.2 compared to 4.3 for men. Regionally, urban areas saw a 6.0% unemployment rate, while rural areas recorded 4.3. The MBS also noted a drop in the employment to population ratio, down to 73.2% from 75.6% in the previous quarter. Rural areas had higher employment rate employment rate compared to 69.5% in urban centers. The big question is, what does this mean for Nigeria's economic outlook, and how can policymakers address these growing imbalances as the country navigates current economic challenges? Well, Paul Alaje, Chief Economist at SPM Professionals, joins me in the studio for answers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, two big announcements made back to back. We have one from the Central Bank of Nigeria regarding the raising of interest rates. We also have the one from the NBS regarding unemployment rate. Both of them have a bearing on each other, but let's start with the Central Bank. In the interest of our viewers, explain to us once again, what's the central reason behind raising interest rates yet again? We've seen this throughout this year.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me once again. The Central Bank of Nigeria, through its Monetary Policy Committee, has increased the monetary policy rates, what's also known as interest rate, on 50 basis points, from what it was to now over 27%. That has implications, certainly. The first implication, or the first goal, there were goals for this to be done. The first goal of the Central Bank is perhaps to combat stubborn inflation. Two, is to reduce money supply. And it's not just the interest rate that was adjusted. The most important thing that people don't seem to talk about is that the cash reserve ratio, also known as cash reserve requirement, was increased to 50% for commercial bank. And it's not only commercial bank that was affected, but the key concern here is for the commercial bank, while liquidity ratio remains 30%. What does that mean? Well, banks will have to do liquidity ratio or cash reserve requirement with the central bank of 50% and must keep 30%. That means, technically speaking, the banks are left with 20% of what is given to them. So that conveniently will track money supply, which is the goal of central bank. Because central bank believe that when too much money are chasing fewer goods, then we have inflation. But just follow my analysis very carefully. So they believe, to my mind, from elementary economics, that when you are able to curtail money supply, then inflation will reduce. But why has it not worked? Nigeria is not the first country. In fact, in economic history or economic literature, we find out that Brazil practiced this method in the 70s, and we called it the failed Brazil experiment. As a matter of fact, Turkey was faced with challenges that led to popular, and people can check this online, what we call Turkish washing machine. Why? People lost so much confidence because government continued to pursue money supply, and they were never able to play the catch-up, and people started stockpiling washing machine rather than having confidence in their local currency. Why? Similar policy that we have today is difficult to have access to Doshma, very difficult to have access to pound, very difficult to have access to dollar. People now resolve to buying washing machines. So those were two goals, among others, in front of central bank. Mark you, there are at least four macroeconomic indicators. The first one is GDP, what is happening to growth. Growth is expected to grow, to surge. For Nigeria, according to the president, the budget he presented in 2024 to National Assembly, the president is expecting a minimum of 6% GDP growth rate. What Nigeria needs is not less than double-digit growth rate, about 10%. But 6 will be fine to start with as a new administration. But what have we seen? In recent time, we have seen 3%, above 3% GDP growth, about 3.19%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, which is about 50% of the target of government. At the end of the year, do I think we'll do up to 5%? No. But I think we may be around 2.5 to 3.5 GDP growth rate. Now, that's the first one. Second one, what is happening to Unemployment, that's underemployment, which is the real reason why we have this conversation. Unemployment has also soared.
Right, we'll get there. We'll get to unemployment later, but let's look at when you say that this particular policy has failed in some other developing countries, as you mentioned. Why do you think that the central bank governor and his team have continued to apply this in Nigeria? Is that they don't have better advisors? What is actually going on?
Well, most central banks have made similar mistakes, not just in Nigeria, but few ones have been able to correct themselves. And I will tell you the few ones that corrected themselves. One in Russia. We saw correction happen in 1999 when Russia knew that there is no way they could compete or have a lower inflation by raising rates. What they did was to reverse, found way to intervene in the force of demand and supply, demand for money and supply of money, so that they can have relative stability instead of continue to allow the currency to float. 2, Germany, after the war, also had to intervene. And 3, another country that we have was Japan, who copied just what Germany did. But there are 3 other countries that never changed, and they are suffering till today. One of them is very close to us here, is Zimbabwe, and we have Argentina. Apart from that, we also have Venezuela, who has also been having major setback because of flotation and some other traditional problem. But you see, why are the policies not working? I think as economists, our job is to educate the people and even policymakers to know exactly why. Now, what we know, what many people know, is that there are 2 types of inflation. And that is what at elementary economy, first degree in most universities, not just in Nigeria, even outside. 2 types of inflation. The first type of inflation is what you call cost push. The second one is demand pull. But when you study economics at advanced level, you know that those 2 levels is just for theoretical understanding. Inflation can be grouped into 2 kinds. And the first one is monetary-driven inflation and non-monetary driven inflation. The most devastating of the 2 is monetary-driven inflation. And what does that mean? When you deliberately agree, whether you are convinced or confused, it does not matter. But when you agree that the strength of your currency is too strong, and you let the tap loose that your currency should float, instead of your currency having increased value, your currency lost value. More so, it becomes more devastating on this condition that you are a net importer. You are a country whose consumption it depends highly on imports. Then there is no remedy.
Right.
2, when it is non-monetary inflation, it is when it has to do with perhaps increase in prices or things that have nothing to do with devaluation. And you saw that the July and August inflation figure came down. Why? According to the central bank governor, who read the communique, he said because of agriculture. He talked about food inflation reduced, and as a result of reduction in food inflation, what happens to that inflation reflected? In fact, core inflation increased marginally. Can we therefore say that monetary too has affected monetary inflation? The answer is no, which means over the years, the 800 basis points that we have increased has really not had impact on the economy. My advice would be we need to review the policy because it is not helping us. So if we must find solution, long-lasting solution to inflationary pressure that we are facing at over 30%, about 32%, and still increasing, then floating our currency will be the primary thing we need to face with or to conquer before we talk about non-monetary factors. Because when you disaggregate the numbers, at least 60% of the figures are induced by inflation, which is monetary in nature.
What sectors of the economy now are the most vulnerable to the higher interest rates that we're talking about? And in addition, 2.5% growth, that is so small for a country, an economy as big as this, so it doesn't make much impact. Even though
National Bureau of Statistics put it as 3.1%, the real...
Still small?
It's very small. I agree with you 100%. The real, the nominal growth was over 16%. When we now make provision for inflation to find new growth, it reduced to 3. So you can see the gap that inflation is doing a lot of damage to the economy. Now, which sector? A lot. Small businesses. What does this mean? To borrow money from the bank, it will surely have impact on lending rate. I've heard some parents say it may not necessarily. That's not true. It will certainly have impact on lending. And what is the lending rate today? You hear of 30, 35%. How do you expect, what kind of businesses will people do with those rates? What kind of businesses? The president is trying to convert Nigeria, change Nigeria to a credit-based economy. How well are we going to achieve this with high interest rates? So it's really going to be very difficult for us not to manage the consequences of high interest rate. High interest rate has three side effects. The first one is that it will crowd out employment. The second one is that it will crowd out investment. The third one, it may take the economy out of positive growth into negative. And when it goes to negative back to back, then we may be faced with a recession. Those are side effects, like drugs. So before you prescribe a particular drug and say, the best thing is let's increase interest rate, we unanimously agree. It's important for Monetary Policy Committee to listen to a second opinion regarding continuous hike of rate. Why? Because we need to safeguard businesses for the economy to exist. Why? They are the largest employer of labor when you disaggregate the numbers. So I see that small businesses will be affected because of this high interest rate. And if small businesses are affected, factories, of course, will be affected. Manufacturers will be affected. And if they affect them, of course, the first target will be labor. You saw the report in labor that unemployment surged to 5.3%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics.
I mean, you're essentially saying that there are major failures tied to this policy and the country continues on that path. Why do you think that policymakers or government officials tend to not listen to reasoning such as what we're discussing now? Why is that so? And where does that leave us as a country?
Well, I really cannot say why government is not listening, but that does not mean, for those of us who feel that there are better actions that could be taken in the interest of the nation and for the better performance of our country, we will continue to say it moderately, especially on credible media platform like this television station. We'll continue to make the opinion known eventually. And it's not that government don't really listen. The will, I think, is the challenge, because I remember sometimes when the president said they've agreed they were going to share for 5,000. And about 4 of us around the country were very vehement that that was going to be a wrong decision. And the president said he has changed his mind. Does that mean president does not listen? He does. But whether the will to implement will be there is a different conversation entirely. So the right things are there. There is difference between what is right and what seems right. So sometimes what seems right may not be right. But eventually, the impact will show. Because if you are wise, it will show. If you are otherwise, we will know. So the job has to do, of course, with those at the heads of affairs to look at, haven't done this over and over again. We have printed money. Where has it landed us? Because it's the cheapest option. Print money, give money at FAC, let everybody have money. What happens to it? Where's our means? We have increased it beyond what is recommended.
We have increased it, actually.
What happened to it? Eventually, it put our economy on high inflation. And we have devalued, hoping that our money will surge. You can see more money is shared at FAC. But hold on. Check what happens to all the state debt. Surge. The same time, as much as we think that we have shortcuts to economic miracles, it does not work. All the economists Nigeria wants to be like have paid their dues. They understand that there are consequences for economic action. Now, economics, if you don't bother about it, certainly it will bother about it. My advice and that of our organization will be that there are certainly some policies we need to review. Look at it. Government says we don't want people to abysmally increase price. A week after, the price of PMS surged. How do you expect those who will want to reduce prices to deal with high cost of PMS, knowing fully well that over 90% of all businesses or employer of labor are in small business?
Okay, let's look at the NBS figures, 5.3%. A lot of people will say, actually, well, this is the official figure, but in reality, there's probably more people out of jobs.
Now, what you need to understand is NBS, and I've advised, I've spoken to NBS on this, 5.3% of those who don't have job 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. The official job most people do is 8 hours a day. If you multiply that by 5, that is 40 hours a week. So NBS, following the ILO standard, ILO said we should use 1 hour a week because it's the standard. Now, taking 1 hour a week, I don't know, it's very difficult to explain, especially in this part of the world. But at that, what should be the goal? The goal should be 2%. Worst case, 3%. Now, we are talking of an alarming 5.3%. Now, you understand it because I'm talking of 1 hour in a whole week. So if 5.3% don't have something to do, then we have a lot to worry about. I saw someone posted on Twitter, another person even tagged me to say that, we heard that they have less than 1% unemployment rate in Nasarawa, that he passed through Maraba, go into Kefi. He obviously saw people who are jobless. I said, yes. Now, what you have seen is that the person may be jobless, but MBS is only looking at 1 hour a week. What MBS should also be reporting for the credibility of the institution is to put side by side 1 hour a week with 20 hours a week and 40 hours a week, so that people can understand that we are not trying to say that everybody now has job, because that is how easy it is for people to misinterpret it. So the 1 hour a week MBS is referring to is only for those who cannot get job within an hour a week, but much more is the number, over 30%, those who cannot get the work for 40 hours in a week. So it's important for us to clarify that fact, that the number is high for 1 hour a week. It should not be more than 2% in the real sense of it. So if we are having 5% for 1 hour a week, imagine what 20 hours will be. Imagine what standard job, what we call regular job in Nigeria, would be, which is 40 hours a week. If 1 hour alone is already 5.3, that is why for us as economists, it is high. It is unmanageable. We need to do something quickly about it. But what is feeding it? When you increase interest rates, what we need, it will crowd out investment. When it crowd out investment, it will crowd out employment. We can agree that the continuous interest rate, continuous interest rate that we have seen, or hike of in interest by the Monetary Policy Committee, is also feeding unemployment market. And not my figure, don't believe what I say. You can ask the National Bureau of Statistics if the number is increasing or reducing.
Dr. Paul Alaje, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.